Exactly. All I know is we try not to go out on weekends.
Oh, we could, yeah, because everybody else does.
Exactly. We don't do any errands on the weekends.
Right.
I have to know because the bus schedule is different.
Yeah. Sheldon, get here from Chatsworth.
Oh, there is a commuter.
I liked your Passover.
Oh, thank
you.
Thanks. I think I
Never
need
sure.
to, so it's about.
I wrote it a little, I was missing something. I was missing some connecting ideas. It was kind of like, I understood it, but I'm not sure everyone else understood it. I needed another to write it. I have to tell you, I put off writing it because I knew the message. I'll speak up. I put off writing it because I was hoping some of the hostages would be returned by them. But every day I say that and it's not happening. So I'm afraid they're not alive. I'm afraid that if they were alive, they'd be returned. So it is a little blurry. I think it's blurry for everybody right now. It's a blurry life we lead. So welcome everybody. We were just talking about Passover, and I looked today and it looks like I wrote zoo on my shirt, but it's day 200. And I thought to myself, somebody's going to say for sure zoo, but it's unbelievable. It's day 200. Day 2. I tried to make the 2 look like it, not like a Z. So folks, come on in. We're letting everybody in. And Sheldon, come on in. We're starting. We've got I've got it up on the screen, the right place. Also show you that we're starting a new class tomorrow night, which is the Talmud. I'm interested in this also because we've never been able to, if it hadn't been for Sefaria, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So this is the Ein Yaakov. It's the edited version of the Talmud. It's the legal parts have been taken out, and it's just, we're left with the Midrash, what we call the Aggadic material, the commentaries and inspirational material. So it was done 500 years ago. So it's not like this was some modernist idea of how to make the Talmud more readable. They actually did this a long time ago as a project, which shows you that people had a hard time kind of grasping the Talmud a long time ago. So this is the kind of the Ein Yaakov is the more readable part of it. And I'll just show you that I was able to do it because of this amazing resource that we have, the Sefaria. And there you have it, the Ein Yaakov. And it listed under Midrash. Technically, I guess it's Midrash, but it's like Midrash. And you can see the author he's not the author because he edited it. He's an editor. But Levi ibn Habib, who lived in North Africa in the 16th century. So it's an old project, but this was available. What is going on out there? It was available because of Sefaria. And as I mentioned before, Sefaria is a nonprofit organization that brings this text together. What?
Do they have like normal books on Sefaria or?
Well, normal books. Here's what it's got. It's got prayer books. It's got liturgy. It's got halakha. So it's got the Talmud and other commentaries, later commentaries, Middle East. Yes, it's Jewish texts, foundational texts. So for example, they have Kabbalistic texts, right? So they have some of these books here. Now look, some of them are in English, some of them are not. So like Sefer Yetzirah there's an English translation, so they can put it next to it. But if you go to if you go to this, there ain't no English. So there are texts,
No English.
yeah, there are texts here that you're gonna be like, I can't read that, but,
Are they in Israel or?
no, they're here in America. So the guy, I think I said this, maybe it was on Wednesday night, but the amazing thing about the guys who started it, the people who started Sepharia is that they are, I'll just show you real quick. Oh wait, I was not showing you that. Yeah, I was not showing people the Sepharia. So here's liturgy, right? Different Sidurim, different prayer books, Haggadot, right? Here's Haggadot for Passover. There's Kabbalistic texts, as I said. So this is what I was saying, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is one of the oldest texts of Kabbalistic thought teachings. But then there's other ones that they're just, there's nothing there. I mean, like these are Hasidic texts, for example. No, there's no English translation on them.
I find it amazing that they're nonprofit, because it must have cost money to start this company up.
Well, these are the people. So these are the brothers that did this. It's unbelievable. So here's Franklin Foer, who's the Atlantic writer. He's the one who just wrote that article about Jews in America we talked about. So he wrote that article that a lot of people were talking about. Here's Jonathan Safran Foer, who's a great writer. He wrote Everything is Illuminated, extremely loud and incredibly close. He's again just an amazing writer. And then his youngest brother, Joshua, is also a journalist, and he is he's a nice guy. He is the guy who no, don't say that. Then there's you never know, but then there's this guy who started Sepharia. So he founded it with Google developer Brett Lockspizer. So I have a feeling that this dude right here is financing it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's a really amazing thing.
Yeah.
So
How
he
long has it
is
been around?
about 10 years,
Okay.
2013. But it's an amazing resource. And again, I'm very appreciative of the work that they do, because it is I'm able to teach things I never would have been able to teach
Sure.
if it wasn't for for
I
this
know when we
resource.
way back when on Wednesday nights, the Talmud, we just had one of the books. The first.
Yeah, but every time we had to buy another volume, it cost $500 to buy another volume of Talmud. So this week we're going through the last three. We're going to start the last three prophets in the prophetic books: Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And I mentioned last week these guys all lived during the Second Temple period. They were living when the temple was being rebuilt, which means they're between 100 and 300 years later than these other guys before them, right? Before, starting with Isaiah, the difference between these three guys and the rest of them is enormous.
So were they around with the destruction of the Second Temple?
So no, so that happens another 500 years
Right.
later. But some of these guys, and we don't know exactly how old they are, but Haggai and Zechariah we mentioned are actually, they're named in the book of Ezra. They're actually, we hear about these two guys prophesizing. So what's the mindset of these guys? Well, it's definitely different than these people, because these people either were talking about the destruction of the first temple, of the temple of Solomon, that temple that lasted for almost 500 years. They were writing about it. They were talking about and warning against it, maybe hoping that people would change their minds. These guys know that what happened. I mean, it's already done. It's already happened. There's no stopping it. There's no what do we do now with the temple being destroyed? The temple is now being rebuilt. And so their focus is really about how that temple will be rebuilt. How will the new community be different than the old community. And so this is their mindset. It's a very different, they have a different agenda. You know, the question is, why are these guys the last guys who we call prophets, right? Why are these the last people? Because we don't have any more prophetic books after this. There are no more prophets that do stuff. Now, that being said, there is a prophet here, Daniel, who this book was written after these books. This book, Daniel, was written after these 3 books. But the words are put in the mouth of Daniel, who lives a little bit before these guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he lives. So Daniel is a different kind of book. It's a weird book. Guess what? These books start to veer into, using Mike's term, and was his birthday yesterday, so he can use this term, weird. There are definitely some weird stuff that we're going to read about in Zechariah. His visions start to get into the stuff that we start to see in Daniel. Now look, Ezekiel has some visions, right? We see that Ezekiel has visions that are, that, you know, he's flying through, you know, to Jerusalem. He's looking at a heavenly, you know, a heavenly Jerusalem, a new Jerusalem. You know, he sees the chariot, right? I mean, there's things that Ezekiel sees and describes that are, you know, by Mike's definition, weird. But Zechariah, it's extensive, and to the point that it's a good chunk of the book, as we're going to see. And we'll get into it today. Maybe we'll actually get to see his visions. And the other thing that's amazing about Zechariah is that, and these other guys, is that, remember, they're talking to a group of people who've either returned from exile or who were never exiled, but the task in front of them is to rebuild after God's punishment had already happened. And I think this is the key thing for us, and I guess you could say for everything that happens after the destruction of the temple. God's punished us. We've already seen it. We've already felt it. It's been destroyed. Number one, is it going to get destroyed again? And I guess even at this point, is it even going to get finished? But also, does God punish us in the same ways now? Or do we start, and maybe this is why prophecy starts to end, is the collective responsibility of the people no longer the focus? So that we start to move away from the ideas that we had in Deuteronomy and that went all the way through the prophets, which is, you're going to live together or die together. You're punished as a community. But now we start to see people being accountable, more accountable for their own lives and their own sins and their own problems. And to some extent, that movement will lead to things like Christianity, but it'll also lead to rabbinic Judaism, and it also will lead to concepts like heaven and hell, personal salvation, and ideas that our ancestors don't seem to be that concerned about. Look, when the prophets talk to us, they don't say, you better get your life in order so that you go to heaven. The prophets don't say that. The prophets say, you get your life in order so the temple doesn't get destroyed. You get your life together so you don't get exiled. There's no get your life together so you go to heaven. So this is why, again, as the prophets move away, or again, maybe we move away from that framework of collective punishment, what is a prophet going to say to us that's going to be applicable to everybody? How's a prophet going to get up there and say, you got to get your life in order because you need to go to heaven? Well, okay, but you don't know what I've done. You don't know what he's done. You don't know what she's done. And it becomes just like a ridiculous exercise in trying to tell people, hey, you're going to be punished individually, or, I mean, because you clearly don't care about being punished as a collective anymore. So that's why this becomes a difficult challenge for prophets. And again, one could say the prophecy ends when there's no more market for it anymore.
Any perspective where we're at with these last 3, we're still doing sacrifices, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's still a place to do sacrifices. To some extent, that's why the temple has to be rebuilt. So there can be a place for the sacrifice. So it's an interesting thing to think about. What is the agenda? What's on the minds of these people? So we're going to read from Haggai right now, which is the first of these. It's a very short book. It's only 2 chapters. And as I mentioned, Haggai and Zechariah are mentioned together in the book of Ezra as working together during this time. What we also are going to read about are the people, and we read about them in the book of Ezra, which is the historical book of this period. It's the part of the Bible that kind of tells us about what was going on with the people here. I'm looking around at the matzah crumbs from Sunday school Seder. It is just to me, this is disaster. I look at that and say, it's a disaster happened here. Passover has begun. And that is in my belly now. Anyways, so I will, we're going to turn it over. I know Rosemary just jumped on, but
I'm going to leave because I can't understand a word you're saying.
you can't hear.
Can't hear.
Reverend Lynn, we're going to miss you.
Well, thank you. I'll miss you. If I get home in time.
You'll jump on. You'll jump on there. Well, we're going to miss you. So Haggai talks about these guys, Zerubbabel, who is the governor of Judah. He's the political leader that the Persians put in charge. And then there's Joshua, son of Jehozadak, which, well, he's the priest. So there's 2 leaders of this community that are kind of in charge. The Persians have put in charge a religious leader and a political leader. Zerubbabel is a descendant of King David. So could he be king? Yes. Does he become king? Well, I'll let you see what happens. Joshua is the high priest of and obviously if the temple doesn't exist, he doesn't have a job. So both of these guys have a vested interest in getting this project off the ground. Again, it tells us it happens during the time of King Darius, towards the beginning of his reign. King Darius is the king of the Persian dynasty, the Achaemenid dynasty, that is in charge of Persia, rules Persia for, I will show you, we'll show you the, yes. Yes.
I don't know much about this prophet, other than when I read it.
Uh-huh.
He's not the only Joe sitting in town square saying rebuild the temple.
So John's saying he's not the only person.
So,
Yeah.
You know, still after all this, I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around prophets and prophecies. And,
So why is this,
I mean, what,
so is your question, why is this guy the prophet?
It's you don't see because you never come over. I don't even see this place. Who sits there at bouquet and, you know, with the sign and what
Holds up a sign?
this.
Yeah, no, so why are these guys, why are these guys the prophets? By the way, so I just want to show you. So this is the guy who we just mentioned, Darius, King Darius. King Cyrus is the king who lets the Jews go back. He's the king who destroys the Babylonians. So not long after him, though, we have Darius, who is an interesting dude because he's not really related to Cyrus by birth, by genetics, but he marries into the family and he claims that he is related through Cyrus's father. We don't know that he is. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. We don't believe he is. But he does become king, and it's his descendants, not really Cyrus's, but it's his descendants that become these kings that last all the way to Alexander the Great. So let me just get rid of that. So so Darius's son is Xerxes. Then you have Artaxerxes, and then you have Xerxes the second, and then Sogdianus, and then Darius the second, Artaxerxes, and it goes through to those guys. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that the last king of this empire, Darius the third, he's the one that gets defeated by Alexander the Great. So you can see that in between these guys is 200 years. That's a pretty long, well, not super long, but it's a decent dynasty that he established. And it's this guy, Xerxes, that according to tradition is Ahasuerus. He is Xerxes. So,
Very Greek.
yeah, well, yes, all the names of these guys, we call them by their Greek name. Darius, that was not the way they pronounced it in Persia. Xerxes, no, it was closer to Ahasuerus. But that's the Greek, and the Greeks were fascinated by the Persian Empire. So, again, these are the rulers. How did, and again, back to John's question, by the way, here's how big the Achaemenid dynasty, this is how big it was. And in the book of Esther, it actually says Xerxes ruled a kingdom from Hodu, India, all the way to Africa, to Kush, which is down here. So the beginning of Esther, it says, Hashverosh, hu Hashverosh melech ad Hodu, Hodu v'ad Kush, all the way from India to Africa. And that's true. And it went all the way into Greece. So the reason why the Greeks fought with them was because the Persians came in and were making inroads all the way into Greece. And so they were fighting over these islands, they were fighting over this territory, and so that's why they fought against each other. And remember, where Alexander the Great's family was in Macedon is up here. So they're actually fighting, they're dealing with the Persians on their back door. Down here is where Athens and Sparta is down here, but these guys were encroaching right on them. So you can see how close the Persians were, even as you can see into Bulgaria and into Yugoslavia, into this part of Europe. So they were really it's a huge empire. It's based here in Iran, but included all the way through to Israel, to Egypt, all those places. So
This is right before the Roman Empire.
this is right before the Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great's Greek people rule for about 200 years. His generals rule this whole area, and then they fall apart under the Romans. The Romans mop up everything. So all of this area will eventually be Roman, and then of course all the way into Italy, and you add that whole empire. Yep, and this is where the Byzantines were based here. So yeah,
Before you get to my
yeah.
And then prior to that, right, there was no name of Palestine and Palestine.
No.
Right? The Romans gave that.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes. So at this point, nobody's calling it that. In the Persians called it Yahud, which was what they called Judea. They called it Yahud. That was a province for them. Israel is nothing but a province to the Persians. It is nothing but a province, part of a province to the Greeks who conquer that area. It is never a nation. It is never a country ever again until the modern era. Until 1948, there is no country, there is no landmass that's referred to as anything other than a province up until that point in time. Nobody called it a country. It was a province of lots of different people.
But Jerusalem was the spot.
Yeah, but it was holy because it had been holy to us first, and then it becomes holy to Christians, it becomes holy to Muslims, but it is only it's never really holy to Persians. It was never really holy to Greeks. It was never really holy to the Romans.
Well, wait a minute, the Crusader states weren't provinces.
No, but they were, when they were states, Rosemary, there was never a state. Well, that's not true. For a couple of years, there was a state that you could say was large enough to be a state. But for the most part, if you recall, Rosemary, the Crusader states fought amongst themselves.
True.
Because none of them was larger than about 5 or 10 miles. So to look at a cohesive country in the land of Israel that was a cohesive country, it just didn't exist. Because the Crusader states were just that. They were states. They were little city states. And so each ruler, each European king carved out a little piece of territory and said, this is my fiefdom. Again, you can kind of see it if you watch the movie, The Kingdom of Heaven, that they get into it a little bit. They tried to have a unified country. It never worked. And we're also talking about, by the way, the whole Crusader period where they controlled anything there really was 100 years. Again, there were little Crusader states that lasted in Akko, and there was a little Crusader kingdom in Edessa and Antioch north, where it wasn't even in Israel, but they called it the Holy Land, but that was Syria, Lebanon. None of those Crusader states, again, lasted for more than 200 years. And again, there was never a unified country there. So this is going back to all the way back to the Greeks. If you look at this, the Xerxes here, which again, you can see in Persian, can't even pronounce that, but it's closer to Hashverosh, Xariasia. I can't even say it because it's not even Farsi. And so it is closer to Hashverosh. It's not, the sounds that you make are not even like sounds we make anymore. But yeah, you can see this was, this was what was going on in the world at that time. So to put it into perspective, when Haggai the prophet is working, when he's prophesizing, this is the time of, for example, Socrates, or not quite Socrates, but like the Greek city states that are like Athens is now finally like a real city. So it's a little bit before Socrates. I don't say it's not the 400s, right? It's still like early 400s, 500s, but Greece is starting to become a reality. But the Persians are still the reality. They're the guys in charge. And again, back to John's original question about these prophets. Look, what's interesting about these two, about Haggai and Zechariah, is that they're actually mentioned in the Bible. The fact that the Bible refers to them as prophets that are working during that time, I'll just show you real quick. I showed it last week, but I'll show you real quick here. The fact that they're actually mentioned in the Bible is significant because we don't have many prophets that are actually mentioned. We said Isaiah is one of the few prophets. Here's in the book of Ezra. It says, then the prophets Haggai and Zechariah prophesied to the Jews in Jerusalem, inspired by the God of Israel. So here's testimony from Ezra that these guys were important. And that's significant because that doesn't happen a lot. That does not happen often, that a prophet will get credit somewhere else in the Bible. Isaiah, Jonah, there aren't many of them that are mentioned in the Bible, in other books of the Bible. So this guy was a significant prophet. Haggai, even though there's only 2 chapters to his book, pretty important. So let's take a look. Let's look at this guy, Haggai, which, by the way, has become a modern Hebrew name again. So there are Israelis named Haggai. It was not a very popular name. Zechariah is become a little bit more popular in Israel, but and again, there are people named Zachary, but it was not a super popular Hebrew name. Haggai is not really a popular name outside of Israel, but it is become a popular name in Israel. So it's interesting that name did come back. I'm not really sure why, but it's just a name that, like, you'll hear Israelis will say, oh, there's Haggai. And you're like, wow, that's not a name that our grandparents or great-grandparents were named. Okay, so let's take a look.
In the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month, this word of God came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Thus said God of hosts, these people say, the time has not yet come for rebuilding the house of God. And the word of God through the prophet Haggai continued, is it a time for you to dwell in your paneled houses while this house is lying in ruins?
Yeah, it's a rhetorical question.
Right.
So you've built your homes, and a paneled house assumes, by the way, a certain level of success and wealth. You're not just living in a tent, you're living in a paneled house, right? And yet the temple hasn't been rebuilt. How can this happen? How can you build your own homes, but you haven't built the temple, right? And so people have returned, they've rebuilt, they're doing stuff, and you haven't built the house for God. Everybody gets this, right? You all understand what he's saying. You are deferring the work that you need to be doing for our community, for God. So you've taken care of yourselves and you haven't taken care of God. And so this is, of course, what Haggai is going to challenge the people with, which is you've taken care of yourselves. You haven't taken care of your religious responsibilities. The temple is still lying in ruins, which, by the way, tells us that the temple was lying in ruins, right? So it wasn't like they didn't know where it was. It wasn't like, it's all been reconstructed or they built something new on it. There's a building that was the temple that is now ruins. And that is at least to Haggai and people who cared, that was an embarrassment. That was a sign of their lack of faith and their lack of concern. And to some extent, like, what are your priorities, right? So here's what he's
Now
going to say.
thus said God of hosts, consider how you have been faring. You have sowed much and brought in little. You eat without being satisfied. You drink without getting your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one gets warm. And he who earns anything earns it for a leaky purse. Thus said God of hosts, consider how you have fared. Go up to the hills and get timber and rebuild the house. Then I will look on it with favor, and I will be glorified, said God.
So you can get what they're saying, what he's saying. You guys have been working, you've started rebuilding your farms, you're starting to rebuild the economy, but it's not working out. And he's saying to them, it's not working out because the temple is not rebuilt, right? You're making God look bad. Take care of God and God will take care of you. I mean, this is the prosperity gospel. If you
The
want
prosperity gospel.
Right. You take care of God. God will take care of you. You go out there and get that temple rebuilt. And yeah. So here's what's going to happen.
You have been expecting much and getting little, and when you brought it home, I would blow on it. Because of what, says God of hosts? Because of my house that lies in ruins, while you all hurry to your own houses. That is why the skies above you have withheld their moisture, and the earth has withheld its yield. And I have summoned fierce heat upon the land, upon the hills, upon the new grain and wine and oil, upon all that the ground produces, upon human and animal, and upon all the fruits of labor. So all we have to do to end global warming is build the temple.
Build the temple. Yeah. Well, you know what?
At least according to this.
But we would say that because of our priorities of taking care of God and building, places for us to study and for us to worship, that God is happy in those situations. By the way, this is the argument that the religious Zionists use in Israel today, which again, we even heard one of the survivors say this. Look, there's a feeling that some Israelis have that as long as those men are praying in their yeshivas and studying in their yeshivas, that Israel will be successful. So that what's taken the place of sacrifice and what's taken the place of the temple are lots of shuls and a lot of Beit Midrashes where people are studying, and that's what helps keep the country running. The prosperity gospel essentially is, again, that's what you do now to serve God. And as long as those people are doing their jobs, then we can continue to succeed in our livelihood. Some people believe that's a trade-off. Now, look, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that makes sense to me personally, but it does make sense to certain people. And when people look at Israel's success and say, look, it's working. It's working. We have enemies, right? And there's another theory about why the enemies are successful, which is we're not crushing them like the Bible would tell us to crush them. And so if we follow the biblical principles, then we would be okay. And again, for religious Zionists, that's a system that works for them. That's why they can say, and those young guys who came to our shul said it, look, we don't care that these people are not serving and doing their military service, because they are doing something, and they believe that it's valuable. That's their belief. It would not be my belief necessarily, but it is their belief, and they feel that makes sense to them. That's why they can say it, because they believe it. So this is part of that idea, which is, again, give God what God needs, and then God will take care of us with these kinds of things that we need. Now, remember, these prophets are still talking and this is why, again, we could say they're in the Bible. They are still talking about collective punishment and collective responsibility and collective reward, which is that it's not like one guy gets good weather. Everyone's going to get good weather, and all the land around us is going to be fertile. Not one guy who's working his plot and he's a good guy. It's still collective. The words that this guy is saying, even though he's writing after the temple is already destroyed, he's writing about collective success. And so he's still working within that framework we consider the prophetic framework, which is, again, whoever you're speaking to, you're talking to the people as a whole. You're not talking to one person. All right. And in this case, well, sometimes you're talking to one person, but it's for everybody to hear. It's for everybody to learn.
Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and the high priest Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and all the rest of the people gave heed to the summons of the Eternal their God and to the words of the prophet Haggai, when the Eternal their God sent him. The people feared God. And Haggai, God's messenger, fulfilling God's mission, spoke to the people. I am with you, declares God. Then God roused the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and the spirit of the high priest, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and the spirit of all the rest of the people. They came and set to work on the house of God of hosts, their God. And on the 24th day of the 6th month, in the 2nd year of King Darius,
which would, by the way, be a very stupid place to break, but that's where we broke, because clearly, well, does that end the idea? They came and set to the work of the house of the Lord. That maybe was where it ended, but definitely not here. But Yom Esrim Ba'ar, on the 24th day of the 6th month.
On the 21st day of the 7th month, the word of God came through the prophet Haggai.
And again, this is now the second prophecy. So again, it's a really weird place to break it, because it really ends here. The period should be read here. It's no, not if you end it here. They came and set to work in the house of God. And then it says, and then the next chapter, or the next idea would be, on the 24th day of the 6th month, in the 2nd year of King Darius. Oh yeah, that is true.
It doesn't quite make sense, does
Oh,
it?
no. Sorry. It's actually, the break is here.
Okay.
In the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 21st day of the 7th month, the word of the Lord. So this is where the break is. It's right here. It's mid-sentence. And again, that's probably where the idea was, which is, again, about a month later is when God spoke to Haggai again. So according to this, they came and set to work on the house of God on the 24th day on the 6th month, which would be roughly around the time of Rosh Hashanah, because they're still keeping it the calendar still starts at Passover. So again, it tells us that the people finally set to work on the temple, which means that these guys had been there for a few years already without a temple, and now they're going to get to work on it. Now, the idea that they didn't have a place to sacrifice, by the way, is not necessarily the case. Could be, again, that they're sacrificing, and we believe that they're sacrificing this during this time. They just haven't rebuilt the temple. They haven't rebuilt a beautiful place for sacrifices. They're probably sacrificing at least outside. Yeah.
Except they doing sacrifices?
No, they weren't supposed to. Did they? Did they? It's possible. Why? Because we don't know for sure that they did, but we do know that Jews in Egypt were offering up sacrifices at a temple that they built in Leontopolis in North Africa already during this period. So the fact that Jews maybe in other places were offering sacrifices to God? Probably likely. They didn't want to talk about it because they're only supposed to be doing sacrifices in Jerusalem. So the fact that they weren't, no, we don't know. We don't know what prayer looked like yet, but we do, and so the book of Daniel, even though Daniel wasn't written during Daniel's time, puts into Daniel's mouth prayers. It puts into Daniel's activities that he's doing stuff to pray and to worship God.
Well, because he's the last book, but it was written. many
Yes.
years after.
But the imagination is that he is doing stuff. But yeah, what's interesting again to think about the fact that most Jews at this time, that Zerubbabel and Joshua are doing their work and Haggai is talking to them, that most Jews are still living in Babylon. They haven't come back yet. And many of them never came back. Like who's there right now? Well, right now, again, this is when like Mordecai and Esther would have been born. Like everyone forgets that Mordecai and Esther are living in Persia when these guys are living in Israel, already trying to rebuild the temple. Esther and Mordecai, they're not part of that group. They didn't go. Now there's midrashim that they eventually go back to Israel, but the Bible never says that they did. That story took place like 30 years after this, 25, 30 years after that. That means that Esther's a little kid. They didn't go back. Her family didn't go back. So there were a lot of Jews that were still living in Babylonia. And we know that because, again, around the time that story took place, that's when we read about Ezra, this great leader who leads another huge group of exiles back from Babylonia back to Israel. But that was already after the temple was starting to be rebuilt, after the community is a little bit stronger. And so people wanted to see whether this would succeed. Guess what? The same thing happened in the 1920s and 30s in Israel. There were a lot of Jews living in America, more obviously living in America at the time, a lot more. There were a lot of Jews living in Europe. They didn't want to come to Israel. They were like, who knows whether that's ever going to work? First of all, the Turks control the country up until 1919, and then the British are controlling the country, and like, who knows whether they're going to let us have a homeland there? So there were a lot of people saying, why would I invest my life in a project that may not succeed? Guess what? Pretty much all of our grandparents, they made that choice. They had a choice. They had a choice. They didn't go. So we've seen it. We know the fact that a group in exile, some of them choose to go back, some of them don't choose to go back, and they come back in waves. And now there are Jews that go and move to Israel today. They're making a decision based on, hey, we know Israel has got some horrible challenges that they have to deal with that we don't deal with here. But they also know I can get a nice house in Tel Aviv or wherever that it's not so bad. So you're not actually, taking a huge risk to move to Israel like the people who did in the 1920s. So if you were one of those people who did it, that's a gamble. Again, you can make the argument life in Russia wasn't so good. Like you can make all the arguments, but you can understand why our family stayed in America and these other people made Aliyah. So the fact that this is happening back then, not really surprising because we've seen it in our own life. We've seen in our own days the way this plays out. And you can imagine that some people are sitting there in Israel going, what are we doing here? Does it make sense for us to build a temple? What if the Persians decide they don't want us here anymore? I'm going to invest my money. I'm going to take my money out of my pocket and give it to this guy who's building the temple. Who knows whether the Persians are going to change their mind and say, sorry, we don't want you to have a temple. I just invested in that. So you get it. I get it. So there's definitely a lot of uncertainty, and that's why Haggai has to challenge the people. That's why he's doing what he's doing. That's why he's here, because he needed to tell the people, don't be afraid. All right.
Speak to Zerubbabel.
Wait, one second, Rosemary. Sorry. Yeah.
Are there evidence of authors of the prophet, of the writings of the prophet?
No. The issue here.
Transcribed into what?
So the issue so John's asking, do we have evidence that these prophets, wrote when they wrote? Look, the fact that they're even mentioned in the Bible elsewhere is already unusual, right? I said, there's not many prophets that are mentioned in the historical records, right? So these guys are, Haggai, as you said, Haggai and Zechariah are, but we don't have, something that was composed directly by them. The interesting thing here is that the Dead Sea Scrolls would have been about 300 years after these guys lived, maybe 350, but that's about as close as we could get. But we do have their works in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have parts of Haggai, we have parts of Zechariah, actually quite a few parts of Zechariah. And so we know that the people of the Dead Sea community had them. Now they had them 300 years later, but they did have them. And it's not that far away from when these guys worked. So you could make the argument that if they weren't really well known by then, they wouldn't have been in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They wouldn't have been included. As I mentioned before, I've mentioned this many times, the book of Esther is not included. Well, we've never found it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means maybe it got destroyed or maybe, but the fact we haven't even found one fragment of Esther there kind of indicates to us that the people who lived at the Dead Sea community, they didn't think Esther belonged in the Bible. That's a pretty weird thing. We have little fragments of every book of the Bible except for that one. That seems like a choice. Yeah.
Present day Israel, and she was exiled, maybe the book wasn't there.
Maybe, but by the time the Septuagint was there, we actually have a Greek version of it that's a little longer. So the fact is that at some point Jews said, this is our book, but not every Jew said it. And at least by 200 BCE, the Jews of Qumran didn't seem to have that idea. I mean,
We don't know if they came from Qumran.
Wherever they came from, those books don't include one text of Esther. That seems like a conscious decision. That doesn't seem like an accident. But Haggai, again, these little books, two chapters in this book, that made it. They had that. All right, so here's what, yeah.
Mike mentioned sacrifice is still happening. I'm starting to think the more and more I study this, he got more away from sacrificing things for God as it became a form of physical tax of food for those that have authority over them.
Well, look at it this way, John. By this point, we just said it. By this point, the majority of Jews, the Judean exiles that still live in Babylonia, the Judean exiles who live in Egypt, Judean exiles who probably, again, already at this point live in Greece, the Judean exiles that are all around the world that are not in Israel were the majority of the population. So think about it this way. The majority of the population can't even offer up a sacrifice. Now, again, you can make the argument that if they really wanted to be where the sacrifices were, they would have gone to Israel. So either they liked their lives back where they were, whatever it was, their priority was not offering a sacrifice. If it was, they'd go to Judah.
Remember that the Levites and the Cohens, that's all they did was they were in the temple, so they needed.
Fine, you're right. But here's the interesting thing. Some of those people that live, Ezra was one of them. Ezra was a Cohen. Ezra, I mean, he comes back. He does come back, but he didn't come back right away. His family didn't come back right away. I mean, he doesn't really deal with that. And again, I don't want to psychoanalyze the guy, but here's a priest who doesn't go back, and there's a lot of them. You'd think, based on your point, which is an interesting question, that's their job. Which means that, I think you can figure this out, there were a lot of priests who said, you know what? I don't need that job. I can live just fine without that job. I mean, throw it out today. How many people that are Kohanim or Levites would go, oh, they're reinstating the temple sacrifices? Now I got a job. How many people are going to do that? I'm going to drop everything and go offer up sacrifices in Jerusalem. How many people would do that? Now it's kind of ridiculous because it's 2,000 years later, but I think it's pretty safe to say that there were people who said it 70 years later. They were like, you know what? My great-great-grandfather was a priest, but what am I going to do? My dad wasn't a priest. I mean, he didn't do anything, and he did just fine. So I think there was probably a lot of priests who said, it's not applicable to me.
Then there was the Maccabees that, that's what they wanted.
Well, the Maccabees, remember, were just one family of priests, right? But you're talking about 200 years later of people who now it's a business. The business has been established and the business is good. The problem, of course, is there's too many. That's the other problem. There's too many priests. And so this system doesn't work with a lot of priests. It's an interesting question to ask, a hypothetical. What if the temple was never rebuilt, right? What if the Jews hadn't decided they needed to rebuild a second temple? What if they had just said, no, God destroyed that temple? But of course, there's guys like Haggai and other people that are saying, you got to rebuild the temple. Look, it's a hypothetical, so we can't say anything. How would history have been different? If the Romans didn't have a temple to destroy, if we hadn't been in the temple, right? If that hadn't been our thing, would Judaism have ever had the same type of traumatic experience that we had when the second temple was destroyed? I mean, I'm just putting it out there. I'm putting it out there. It's just hypothetical. Can't answer that. But what we can tell you is that it's a fair hypothetical to throw out. It's not some strange what if, because guess what? The reason Haggai is in the Bible, the reason Haggai we even know about him is because he's telling people you have to rebuild the temple. That means there were a lot of people who didn't care. Whatever is happening, Haggai and Zechariah we read about. You're right. There are other guys in the town square, but who knows what they're saying? We do know one thing, by the way, guys. We do know one thing. Right at the beginning, it says, the word of God, is it time for you to dwell while this house is lying in ruins, right? Right? It says right here, you're not doing good because of this. And he says, there are people who say the time has not yet come for rebuilding the house of God. Now that to me tells me that there were a lot of people saying it, right? It's not just like one or two people are saying it, that they're saying the time has not yet come for rebuilding the house of God. Well, why? Why? Haggai is saying, no, we got to rebuild the temple. But there were people saying it's not yet time.
How long would be next time?
When?
First time.
70 years.
Okay, so we have a second or third generation of people coming back to Israel.
Yeah.
So they're not used to having the first temple. They've only heard stories.
Correct.
So it's like, why do we need it? You know, we lived our life without a temple. Why do we need one now?
Well,
It could have been all gone.
that,
It had been remnants.
well, that's what it said. It said there were ruins. It says the ruins are there. So again, but you can understand the argument. So yes, maybe some said, what do we even know from this? But other people are saying, well, we got to rebuild it because look at the ruins. And then you have a guy coming there saying, look, the reason we're not successful yet in our other stuff is because the temple is still in ruins. But the fact that he says it means that, well, there are people who are on the other side who are not saying that, right? He's saying it because there's a group of people, a significant group of people who are saying the opposite, that are saying, we'll get around to it. It's not the right time. When's the right time? Well, you know, maybe we'll build it when we're a little bit more successful. Maybe, you know, God needs to send us a sign, right? We don't have a sign. Wait for the sign. Look, there were people who said the same thing about Israel in 1948. There were Jews who said, this isn't the time to do it, right? The Messiah hasn't come back. And they still, by the way, live in Israel. They're called the Neturei Karta, and they live in Jerusalem and Mea Shearim, and they're the ones who still say Israel is illegal because Messiah hasn't come. So they weren't speaking for necessarily a lot of people, but they did say it. And there were also, of course, people who were scared. There were people who said, look, if we try to establish a country right now, we're going to be destroyed. Why? Because everybody said that. The United States said it. The United States told Harry Truman, the State Department said to him, if you declare Israel a country, they will all be wiped out. And there were a lot of Jews who said the same thing. They lived in America and they said, this is a recipe for the next Holocaust. And they said it, and they argued about it in America. And it was the crazy people who said, what are you talking about? We've got to do this. We have nothing left to lose. But there were other people who said, no, wait till the Jews there get stronger, wait till they build more infrastructure, wait until they can build an army. And quite frankly, everybody was afraid of the Arab armies. Everyone was afraid that these Arab armies would crush Israel because numerically they were superior. Numerically and economically, they were far more advanced. They actually had airplanes. Israel had nothing. They had no air force. So everything would have told you this is not the time to do it. Again, I think the issue is we as America, as the State Department, as the British, as everyone else, and including a lot of Jews, thought the Arab countries would fight much better than they did, and they didn't. But based on the numbers, you wouldn't have said it was a good time. So this is, like I said, very relevant for us because we've seen it in the last 75 years in Israel. People who said the time is not the same.
Go to reach Jerusalem without the temple.
So Sheldon asked, were Jews still making pilgrimage during those 70 years? We don't know for sure, right? That we don't have an accounting of it.
I'm wondering if that would have been the Christian religion.
What do you mean?
Well, if there was no temple,
Oh,
Jesus would not have come to Jerusalem.
yeah.
For Passover.
So yes, so to use that hypothetical that I threw out, that if the second temple hadn't been rebuilt, would there have been Christianity? I think that's a safe. There's a argument to be made that Christianity would not have existed if there hadn't been a temple to be destroyed. Again, because that became a climactic breaking moment for us. So if a second temple had never been rebuilt, would there have been Christianity? It's a tough one. It's tough to imagine that it would have developed out of Israel, out in the same way. Yeah. So yeah, that's why this is such an important thing, that this little remnant of Jews decided to rebuild the second temple. And again, you can make the argument, by the way, Sheldon, that's why for Christians, this story is important. I don't know that anyone's really thought it. I don't know that Christians really thought it out that way. But if you ask the question, why is this important? Yes, you could make the argument if the second temple hadn't been rebuilt, there was nothing for Jesus to, there would have been no need for Jesus to come to Jerusalem. There would have been there would have been no reason for that to happen. So yeah, it's an interesting question, interesting hypothetical. So here's back to the text.
Speak to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and to the high priest Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and to the rest of the people. Who is there left among you who saw this house in its former splendor? How does it look to you now? It must seem like nothing to you.
Yeah, and that tells us that there were some people who were in their 80s or 90s who remembered what it looked like 70 years ago, which is interesting because it's this question, it's a rhetorical question. Again, for the people who saw this, and there are some of you, this must be crazy for you to look at this and not see this here.
But be strong, O Zerubbabel, says God. Be strong, O high priest Joshua, son of Jehozadak. Be strong, all you people of the land, says God, and act, for I am with you, says God of hosts. So I promised you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit is still in your midst. Fear not.
And again, al tira'u, don't be afraid. They were afraid. They were afraid. You can understand why they were afraid. But of course, here we have something we think about, especially right now at Passover. I promised you when you came out of Egypt. So you can see that people are still using that hundreds of years later. And of course, now we're doing it thousands of years later, talking about the promise that we have, B'tzeit Mitzrayim, and leaving Egypt. When you left Egypt, and my spirit is still with you, folks. I've been with you the whole time.
For thus said God of hosts, in just a little while longer, I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations, and the precious things of all the nations shall come here, and I will fill this house with glory, said God of hosts.
So now you're starting to get a little bit to what the prophets did before, which is tell the people what's going to happen in the future. And what he just told them is, I'm going to shake things up. And when that money starts falling back to earth, It's going to fall here. It's going to come here to Jerusalem. So think about that. He's talking about a worldwide change, the worldwide changes of stuff that's going to happen. And he says the money is going to come back here.
Why do you see it that way? I don't see it that way.
Why? What do you see?
Oh, it's too, what's the right word? It's too, it just makes it look money grubbing. No, I look at it differently. All the precious things of all the nations shall come here. I know the next line. I see that. I understand that. But that dovetails into the fact that if God created earth, naturally all the precious minerals or metals will be his. He created them.
Yeah, but they're coming to Jerusalem.
But it could mean, to me, the precious things is not things, it's people.
Okay, but what does this next line say?
I understand.
Well, so read it. Read it.
Silver is mine and gold is mine, says God of hosts.
Why would an author put that in there?
So why would God wait? Not only that, John, is why does God say it? Because what he's saying in a very poetic way, but it's there. And again, it seems kind of money grubby. I agree with you. Is that if you build it, they will come. And what's going to come, what's so interesting about this is not just that Jews will come here, but pagans will come here. Pagans will come here if we build it. If we build it, they'll want to come here and see it.
At this time, was the Torah the only?
It's not even, yeah, and the Torah is not even edited yet. It's not even edited until Ezra. It's close. It's coming close. But they're really, like, we don't even know what documents they have. What we do know is that they're listening to a prophet. They've listened to other prophets. The question, again, your point is well taken, that this does seem to be kind of money grubbing. But what it's telling you is, he's telling the people, invest in this project, build this thing, build it, because the money will come. And it's not just going to be the future of our people that are going to invest in it. Other people are going to invest in it. And he was right. Because what we know of, that by the Greco-Roman period, by the time of the Romans, and this is one of the reasons why Herod built it up too. Herod built the temple, and we really would call it the third temple because he knocked down the other temple. He knocked down the second temple to the foundation and rebuilt it as a third temple. We don't call it that, but it's the second temple that he rebuilt, the Herod temple. That temple was so beautiful, was so opulent, was so breathtaking that Gentiles came from all around the world to come to that temple. He built the most beautiful temple in the world. There was no temple to Jupiter, to Poseidon. There was no temple like this temple that he had built. Why? Because it was a temple to one God. And his statement was, all of those other people that worship all those gods, because you went to Rome or you went to Greece, some city there, Athens, Corinth, wherever, they had 20 temples. They had a temple to Nike. They had a temple to Demeter. They had a temple to, whatever god or goddess you liked. We have one God, and we put all of our energy in worshiping that one God. And that's what they did.
That was post-Carthage.
Yeah, it's post, but what he did is he built it up knowing that Gentiles would come for the attraction. And I want to make this clear. He knew what he was doing, and he built it to some extent like a Disneyland. He built it so that people would come, anybody who wanted to worship. They said, well, you want to worship the one God? This is the only place you can come to worship. And again, this was before, like, Disneyland had one in Orlando and one in Japan and one in China. There was one Disneyland, and they came to Anaheim, and this was like 1950s Disneyland. This was the only place that you could come to see Mickey Mouse. And I'm not comparing God to Mickey Mouse, but I want to tell you, using this analogy, understand that a whole city grew up around the city, right? And so people came and they built hotels and convention centers. And that's what happened with Jerusalem. And he knew that if he built the infrastructure, that there would be business. Now, he was unfortunate in his vision, because 50 years later, it gets destroyed. But it got destroyed because, to some extent, it got too big, it got too powerful. And again, like, how do you manage something?
It wasn't sustainable.
Yeah, he built it, but he was too successful to some extent. And of course, then it became part of the whole political dynamic of what happened there, but he was 100% right. This guy, Haggai, is talking about it on a much smaller scale. He couldn't imagine necessarily what King Herod did, but he has the same idea. He has the idea that if there's going to be on the horizon changes in the political climate, what we can do here is build something that'll last forever. And maybe if you think about it, Israel's never going to have an economy based on grain or on any product, right? It's not big enough, and it doesn't have enough resources. But it does have this amazing, whatever you want to call it, this religious energy. And let's build on this religious energy. And that's what Haggai is talking about. That's what Herod talked about. And quite frankly, that's what Israel does now, which is make sure that everybody has access to Jerusalem, make sure that everybody can come and worship there. They want Israel wants Muslims to be able to come there. I mean, in an ideal situation, everyone can come to Jerusalem.
But this specific time, I see it totally different. I'm reading it totally different. I see the line. I read it explains that. I see it as a faith at the time was disparate at best, right? People had dispersed. And Haggai, right, or God through Haggai, to me, all these minor prophets are saying, listen, we need to stay focused here, right? And you mentioned about satellite businesses. I'm not an expert by any means on early monetary theory, right? Although gold and silver were precious metals at the time, I'm sure we are, and we use for trade. I see it totally different. It's more of we've lost our way. So if we build something quite nice, as you mentioned, people will come, not so much for the money as they will come to regain faith and see God as God and not these little stuff. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking.
So John, John, the point is that you're hoping that the people will have a vision of what can happen beyond the monetary. But you can make the argument, yeah, that would be nice. It would be nice if people didn't have to be reminded of their financial future or why this is important to their pocketbooks. But he's done it from the very beginning. Haggai is telling the people, look, he said it in the first chapter. If we don't get this rebuilt, God's not going to give us the success that we deserve, that you've been working so hard. And you're not getting enough water. You're not getting enough grain because of that. You're not getting enough of produce because you haven't taken care of God. So I want to just tell you, Haggai, to me, never stops talking about the bottom line. And you can make the argument, yeah, well, John, you're right. It shouldn't be about that. But he talks to people at the level that they need to be reminded, which is in their pocketbook. This is your chance to be successful.
Build a tourist attraction.
Yeah, and he says
it seems so sad.
I agree with you. No, we haven't morphed. Every human being has this part of ourselves where we think about the material, right? Where we think, and unfortunately, Haggai talks about it more than other prophets, but because again, it's a very short book and it's just basically what he's got. But he is talking to people on a practical level. You could make the argument, he's talking to people where they're at, which is, if I talk to people, I've got to be able to make the message. I have to make it understandable. And you're right. It's frustrating that you have to do this with people.
I don't think God put precious metals on this earth for, I understand.
Well, John, no, that's the point.
Species that he put on this planet it's there. I guarantee.
No, John, you can read this line. Silver is mine and gold is mine, says God of hosts. It's all God's. So he's reminding people, you're just giving back to me what I've given to you.
The purpose is not to be used for trade. It was used for us to our lives are so ephemeral. They're so fleeting.
Yeah.
Right? It's not for, it's just morphed into this over thousands of years. It's just.
No, but what's interesting is that you can say that's what this line really means, which is it really isn't yours. It really isn't yours. It's mine. It's always been mine.
And it should be used for other things other than trade.
I would say he gets to that. I mean, you could say that's where it would natural, but he's telling people, you know, we got to build the temple. Got to use that money for the temple.
The glory of this latter house shall be greater than that of the former one, said God of hosts. And in this place I will grant prosperity, declares God of hosts.
Yeah. So
There's
build
that
it,
word.
make it build again, and then you'll be prosperous. Again, I don't think that's the only way it has to be. That it definitely seems as though that's what he's talking about, but that's not really what he said. Because the King James says, Mary, yeah,
And what is the Hebrew word?
shalom. I will give shalom.
Prosperity isn't shalom.
Okay, hold it, wait. So
Peace, love.
yeah, but wait. Okay,
harmony.
yes, but what is the other meaning for shalom? What's the root of shalom? No, what's the root? What does the word shalem mean? That's why they translated it this. Because they didn't translate it the way that we'd like it to be, which is peace, because it seems that he's talking about the wealth of the place, the success of the place. Well, shalom, the root of shalom, the word of shlema, when we say refuah shlema, what do we mean by that? What does that mean? Refuah shlema means a full healing, a complete healing, complete. So the word shalom really at its root, shalem means full. So when we say the Kaddish Shalem, it's the whole Kaddish, it's the full Kaddish. So the understanding of like where shalom means peace is that it's wholeness, it's contentment, it's you've got the full thing there. Nothing's missing. So shalom definitely means peace. I will grant peace here. It could be the translation. But the reason that, and again, I wouldn't necessarily translate it as prosperity. I would have said, if you're going for that, you would have said contentment or fullness or wholeness. I will grant wholeness to it. But that's really what it means. It means wholeness. It means completeness. And that's why this translator went to prosperity, because the sense is that he's talking about economic prosperity. But this is what shalom means. I know. But that's when God says, I will give you peace, when we translate it as we will give you peace, the understanding is also wholeness, contentment. So when I bless a bar bat mitzvah today, when I translate, and I do this intentionally because I know what the word shalom means. So when I give the blessing to the kid, the last line is, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom, right? We say, Yivrecha Adonai v'yishmerecha yarana. The last line is, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. And I always say, may God grant you wholeness, contentment, peace. All means the same. It's all from the same word, but a sense of wholeness, a sense of completeness. You know, you should feel complete. Yeah. But there's an important idea that, look, when I say to a kid, I hope you find peace. What does that mean? Like, yeah, it's nice. I hope you find peace, but kid's going to be like, I'm at peace. I'm fine. I'm always fighting with me. Most kids, thankfully, don't go through their lives at war with people, but contentment, wholeness, a sense of feeling whole. That's what I definitely want kids to feel. I don't want to feel like they're missing something, right? That they feel like they're not complete, that they're missing. That I really want kids to feel a sense of wholeness, a sense of completeness, right? That they're not like, I'm missing out. I'm missing a piece of myself. I'm not complete. I'm not a complete person. So that's what, when I say shalom to people, that's really what we're saying. Because again, we say shalom means peace, but it's really contentment.
You're taking Casper the Friendly Ghost? Ghosts are sacrilegious. Nothing friendly about that.
Somebody's
Very well.
on.
Fox, adultery, genocide.
All right. Yes. So whatever, little piece of history. All right. So now we're going to go to, so he says it's going to be bigger than before. Maybe he was right. It took a couple hundred years still, but eventually it does get bigger. But, all right. So here's what it says. This is the last part of his prophecy. Rosemary. Oh, she's gone for a second. So on the 24th day of the 9th month in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of God came to the prophet Haggai. So this is about 3 months later. 3 months later. Yeah. Oh, it's very specific. Still the 2nd year of Darius, but it's now the 9th month. Thus said God, the God of hosts, seek a ruling from the priests as follows. If someone is carrying sacrificial flesh in a fold of their garment, and with that fold that touches bread, stew, wine, oil, or any other food, will the latter become holy? In reply, the priest said no. So he throws out a question, a legal question to the priest. By the way, there's no rabbis yet. There's nobody who else would answer this question except the priest. And he says, if they're carrying some sacrificial animal and it comes in contact with something that's not normally can be holy, can it become holy by touching it? Does it come holy by touching it? He's going to teach a lesson. A guy went on, if someone is defiled by a corpse and they touch any of these, will it be defiled? And the priest said, yes. Yeah.
At this time, these were these were the ways, this was dispute resolution.
Yeah, to ask the priest.
At the time, that was the time.
Yeah, and especially, and it's, yeah, it's after Deuteronomy, but it's after Deuteronomy, but before there's anybody else other than priests that can answer these questions. But he's asking, by the way, he's asking priestly questions too, by the way. He's not asking random questions about Judaism. He's asking questions that priests need to know. But again, at this time, what else do you need to know religiously, right? What else do you need to know about religion other than that? At the time, there were judges and
There were?
yeah.
So
So
there was,
Yeah.
I-
no, we know, I know, but there are judges at this time. There are judges. So the king had judges. The king
He
had,
appointed these.
yeah, and in this case, because they're under Persian rule, they're under Persian law, and they were Persian, these were
religious questions.
Persian, yeah.
Priest.
So now, when it comes to a religious question, they come to them. So again, touching something holy, does it become holy? No. If it touches something unholy or, tema, we use the word tameh, this is tameh nefesh, the defiling through that, does it become? And he says, yes. He says it does become.
What does that mean? It's like touching that body, touch somebody?
Yeah,
Somebody touches
you
their
define
body.
people who, as soon as they're done touching that, they wash, and then they have to spend some time out of the community, and then they can come back.
Really?
Yeah.
More people dying every day?
Yeah, but those people who did it, they would have one person do it, and then, if it happened the next day, somebody else came out and did it.
They had a lot
Was
of
that,
undertakers.
yeah. They had undertakers and they had people who would never, or they would have, again, these group of people who would essentially never come into contact with anything holy, right? So they could never come near anything where they would not only make someone else untouchable to some extent, but I mean, look, this is why Indians have a caste of untouchables who did these kinds of things, because they would never come in contact with anything good. And so it was like, nobody wants to be an untouchable, but we didn't have an untouchable class, but we definitely had people who were never going to come into contact with anything holy. That's why priests could never deal with a dead body. Never. They never could come in contact with a dead body unless it was their immediate family. I mean like their spouse or their parent.
In
They could
contact, could they go to a gravesite and do a prayer?
not unless it was their immediate family. And that exists even for Kohanim to this day. There are Kohanim who will not step foot in a cemetery unless it's an immediate relative. And that is Orthodox, Jews who take the Holocaust seriously will not go if they're Kohanim, only if they're priests. If they're not Kohanim, it's not legitimate. But again, it's not like anyone's going to ask them to make a sacrifice tomorrow, but because of that rule and because they're Kohanim, they won't do it. So he's asked this question. He's asked this question of the priest. So now, why did he do it? Thereupon Haggai said, that is how this people, and that is how this nation looks to me, declares God. And so too the work of their hands. Whatever they offer there is defiled. And now take thought from this day backward. Is this day backward, right? Look at this. For forward, right? But interestingly, in Hebrew, the word in Hebrew, it actually looks like it says from this day backward. But again, what are you going to do? Like, however you look at time, the reality is he says, as long as no stone had been laid on another in the house of God, if one came to a heap of 20 measures and would only yield only 10, and if one came to a wine vat to skim off 50 measures, the press would yield only 20. I struck you, all the works of your hands, with blight and mildew and hail, but you did not return to me, declares God. And so here he tells him, look, you have not rebuilt the temple, and I have made sure, we heard in the first chapter, that you are not going to be successful. Nothing you do is going to come out right, because to some extent, again, just understand, it's like you are defiled. You are defiled. And what has defiled you? The fact that you have not rebuilt the temple.
Is that, or they're disparate and lost faith?
The reality is he says to them, you have not laid, as long as no stone had been laid on another in the house of God. He says, you haven't rebuilt the temple.
But that, to me, that's the right word.
You think he's just speaking like a metaphor?
Yeah.
No, he's telling them, look what he says. Take note from this day forward, again, same kind of phrase, Simu na levavtem, min hayom hazeh. On the 24th day of the 9th month, from the day when the foundation was laid for God's temple, take note, while the seed is in the granary, and the vine, and the fig tree, and the pomegranate, and olive tree have not yet borne fruit, from this day on, I will send blessings. So because you started rebuilding the temple, from now on, I'm going to start giving you fruit.
Because that's like raising the barn.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Brings everybody together.
Yes.
Everybody starts kumbaya.
Yeah, they start doing what they're supposed to be doing, building the temple.
It's not just building the temple, bringing everybody together.
I know that you're trying to find a way of not making this all about what they got to do. They got to do it, John. For them, building the temple, for Haggai, and again, you could say it's for God. God's saying it. You got to rebuild the temple. It's simple as that. Whatever you do. You can make the argument that at this time, people, I know what you're saying, but at this time, you can make the argument that people still need to have the temple, and they're not going to do it without it. Without the temple, they're not going to get around to it.
They need the temple because of the ancillary effects that it has, coming together for the purpose of that.
Yes, and you can make the argument that every people in the world have temples. So every group in the world, that's the only way they worship. The idea of having prayers in your house or in your building or in your classroom or whatever else, that's still a few hundred years away. Nobody did it. Everybody that we know of in Africa, in Asia, in South America, in every corner of the world that we've ever seen, they built buildings, they created a room, they created a sacred space where they believed God was.
Well, but that also
everybody.
That also assists in having civil society and participating under the rule of law without anarchy.
You could make the argument that yes, religion was necessary as part of the agricultural revolution to create a hierarchy and to maintain civilization. But it's still
not to make to assist it as one of the pillars.
It helps maintain.
Exactly what the foundation
yeah, but
is.
it maintains civilization because people come into the city to worship at the temple, and that keeps the city.
It's their industry.
Yeah, people have to come there to then pay the priest, bring the priests, and it keeps the whole system working.
No, but what Rosemary said, I'm trying to find a way, Rosemary, to get away from the root of that.
Well, you live 2,000 years later when Jewish people and now Christians and every other religion said, you know what, we don't need a building to have God be there. Now, I will tell you that didn't happen overnight, right? That happened when people started thinking what's really important. But you know, John, that every great city in Europe built a cathedral. Every great city in
If
Europe.
their cathedral gets destroyed, they rebuild it still.
Yeah. And it meant that people would come to the city to do business, to worship, to make a pilgrimage, whatever you want to call it. It helped make sure that the city had a viable economy, and it was important. So it didn't happen overnight, you
I
know?
think God wanted to help you. I do. I think I think he created this species and he said, oh my God.
It was a way to hold a civilization together after it got bigger than 100 people or so. Stonehenge was a pilgrimage site.
I'm not debating or arguing with you. God, after doing this, I do believe this got out of hand.
Yep.
And, this is a species, he never counted on this.
You also live in the suburbs.
3,000 years later, I get it.
You live in the suburbs. So we choose to live away from that type of life. We consciously made a decision, us, me, you, everyone sitting in this room, consciously made a decision not to live in an urban setting. So this is a new development, right? In the last 75 years, 60.
The railroad made it possible.
But this idea that what that means for us consciously to say we don't want to live in the city, for us to even say that, for John to articulate that feeling of like, you know, God doesn't want us to live like that.
I think God wanted, take away the extremes, so don't get crazy on me. I think God wanted Woodstock.
Okay, you could be right. The reality is that that we feel because we're people, we've gone back to the biblical notion that the cities are a rough place. What happens here by the time of Haggai is this understanding like, hey, this is the only way for it to work. That's what's frustrating. And that's, John, what you're articulating is your frustration with the fact that, yeah, but it's that by Haggai's time, there is a complete accommodation of this need to have a temple in the city that people have to come to. Because we know that during Abraham's time and during the idyllic time of the Bible was that people could worship God. Abraham offered sacrifices anywhere he was. Jacob offered sacrifices anywhere where he was. And we know that the Bible shows that shift to Jerusalem as the center. And it was not something that everyone liked. But by Haggai's time, we're just like, well, what else are you going to do? And so this idea of the city, and you can make the argument too, by the way, that Haggai knows that if Jerusalem doesn't have a temple that's an amazing temple, the economy is also not going to bounce back. But it's frustrating because you're giving into the basic instincts. You're giving into the fact that like, okay, but why couldn't God have just said, we don't need to rebuild a temple. Everybody go back to your house, go back to your homes, love God in your house, and we don't have to have a city. We don't have to be like that. But you can make the argument, if we don't have the city and we don't have the political wherewithal to defend ourselves, we can't put ourselves behind a wall. We can't deal with the next time that there's going to be a crisis, and we can't survive.
That brings up two questions. One, as I know it, many Chabbads start out without a facility, right? So they're arguing that it's possible to do that. And then two, why do we schlep here? Why are we here? Why aren't we just on virtual?
So
Right, we're here because
so we know that there's a power of being together, right?
Yeah.
But there's also this idea that we have, like you said, do we need to have, do we need to have a building? Does there have to be one building that is, holier than any other place? But it's a fine line, right? I mean, do we spend money? Do we raise money to fix up our building, or do we raise money to make sure every kid can go to religious school? I mean, synagogues deal with these priorities all the time, but I do think that we also have a sensibility that's come about after thousands of years and other experiences. I mean, when a Jew in New York or even in LA decided they want to build Wilshire Boulevard Temple, they want to build Temple Emmanuel, they want to have a beautiful urban synagogue that their Gentile neighbors can say, oh, the Jews are just as important as we are. That was a psychological statement. That was a socioeconomic statement. That was a statement of, we've arrived, we're as big as you are. And they spent millions of dollars, the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars. I mean, Wilshire Boulevard just spent $70 million refurbishing a place in Wilshire and Western where there are no Jews within 5 miles of that place. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but there aren't many. But the point is that we've always had that issue of, on one hand, wanting to be respectable and therefore building a place that's going to be respectable versus what are our priorities? What should really be our priorities?
It's about being together and doing whatever.
Look, I will tell you this. I don't know the answer, John. I go back and forth on it. So we recorded the Joe Buchanan service here a month ago, a little over a month ago, 6 weeks ago. He was here, did an amazing service. We recorded it. We had a very good camera work on it. It came out great. But with all due respect, when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at our bema and I'm looking at the art behind it. I'm thinking to myself, this does not look like a very optimal synagogue, right? This looks very simple, very streamlined, very stripped down, whatever you want to say. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, what's the message, right? First of all, we're going to put it on JLTV. I'm not necessarily going to say, hey, this is live from, it's not going to say live from Temple Beth on me anywhere, because it's just going to go, what I did is I clipped it down. I couldn't use that service in its totality for the network anyways. There was too much stuff so I cut out like 4 songs. But I looked at it and I thought to myself, look, if I'm looking at this not as the rabbi of Temple Beth, if I'm looking at it as a viewer, do I look at it and go, where the heck is the guy? Is he in someone's basement? So I looked at that and I thought to myself, no, it's good. It's good enough. And I said, look, whatever it looks like, it looks good enough. But I had that internal conversation about it. I did, because I didn't say, oh, but the sound was so good and it will look so good. It was fine. And so we did. I took out 4 songs and we're going to play them. We're going to play them in the recorded service. And I think they're good. But I had that internal dialogue with myself. If the synagogue, if the backdrop behind them had looked more impressive, I never would have had that discussion. But look, it is what it is. I'm just telling you, like, it's a legitimate question. It's a legitimate question to ask ourselves, because, is the building that we're in an expression of our connection to God? Do we say that the nicer the building it is, the more we love God? I would say it's kind of ridiculous, but there is that
that's
feeling.
ridiculous. I come from I left a temple that was very fancy and beautiful in Redlands to go to one that's has much better sense of community and smaller and cozier. Sarah worked at Wilshire Boulevard too. And there it's, the rabbi show and a lot of competition between rabbis. And a lot of their time is spent trying to get the money to turn on the air conditioning for that building. It's enormous. It's like $6,000-7,000 to air condition that building for high holidays.
Yeah.
I feel much more comfortable at your temple and the priorities that your temple has, rather than trying to make a building. And the young generation doesn't want that anyway. Buildings are not important to them. They don't want to promote big buildings to.
Yeah, I
And you've got a well-educated temple.
yeah.
You've got congregants that can read Torah and kids that get up and can read the service. There are other temples I go to where the kids just say the Kaddish or Kiddush, and they're for Barbara, and they're done. That's their Friday night service.
Yeah.
And the congregation.
I appreciate. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that, Gil.
And the congregation too doesn't know the prayers, the meaning of the prayers or anything. The rabbi and the cantor does the whole thing, and they don't really. It's really become something that they observe and they see. And your congregation is not like that. This Torah study is amazing.
Which goes back to Haggai. which goes back, my original statement was that yes, gold and silver are mine. But I can't imagine him saying it's gotta be big and bold and opulent. I think he's saying, just like Temple with me, the strength of your community is the fiber of the congregants.
Absolutely.
Well, I will say that he definitely has,
You need
I mean, well, yeah, and so that is part of the argument is he's trying to set the bar high enough so the people will actually get down to it because they have nothing, right? So yes, they have nothing. What's so amazing about this to think about is these are our ancestors, right? These are our spiritual, physical, whatever. These are our ancestors who are literally debating to some extent. They're having an internal debate. They're having a societal debate over whether to build this temple at all. They're having a debate whether to do this. They're not sure. They're not sure whether to even build it. So he's got to inspire them to do it. That's what he's doing. But again, it's weird to think that like, what if he wasn't successful? Would we be here? We definitely wouldn't be here the way we are. But what would have happened to a people? Because we don't seem to have been evolved enough yet to actually answer that question with, yeah, but we can worship God in our homes. We can worship God in our backyards because we still need to sacrifice. I mean, the people are not willing to give up sacrifices yet. So they can't wrap their head around that. So what are they going to do? And they don't really have anything else yet, assumedly. They don't have enough liturgy or enough prayers or other rituals. They don't have necessarily like, they don't have all the holiday things that we can do that don't require sacrifice. So they're not quite ready for the next step, if you will. But they are debating whether to really do this. All right, so let's read what happens with this.
And the word of God came to Haggai a second time on the 24th day of the month. Speak to Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah. I am going to shake the heavens and the earth, and I will overturn the thrones of kingdoms and destroy the might of the kingdoms of the nations. I will overturn chariots and their drivers. Horses and their riders shall fall, each by the sword of his fellow.
So again, this is this message again, that there's going to be an overturning of the political realities, right? Kings and kingdoms are going to fall. There's going to be a bunch of political upheaval.
On that day, declares God of hosts, I will take you, O my servant Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, declares God, and make you as a signet, for I have chosen you, declares God of hosts.
And that is the end of the book. So we can say, Tav v'neshalem tehillah el borei olam. We give thanks to God, the creator of the universe. But again, that's it, right? He ends basically with that same message of, there's gonna be a reset, right? There's gonna be a reset in the political reality, and who's gonna come out on top? You are, Zerubbabel. You're gonna do fine out of this. That never happened. I hate to tell you, but it didn't happen. So Zerubbabel does not become any more powerful than he would have been maybe without the temple or without more exiles coming back. There never is another dynasty. He's telling him to some extent, right? You've been chosen, right? Yeah, something good is going to happen to you. Now, again, it doesn't say specifically, I'm going to make you king, but it seems to be, I'm going to make you king. There seems to be a promise here for Zerubbabel that you are going to come out of this as a more powerful monarch, or a monarch, beyond just being a governor. You're going to be like a king. It doesn't happen. There never is a king from the line of David again that's going to be king over Judah. The next king we ever have that we can ever call a king is the Maccabean kings, and they're descendants of Aaron. They're Kohanim. And they call themselves kings, they make themselves kings, but they never were supposed to be kings. So we do know that there's a prophet. I mean, Haggai is doing his job. You have a king, or like a man who could be king, Zerubbabel, and then you have Joshua, who's the priest. So you have the same roles that we had before, but the one that doesn't come out with anything to some extent is Zerubbabel. So we have a little bit more time. We have like 15 more minutes, and I do want to get into the prophet Zechariah. We're not going to get into his really amazing prophecies. We will, and we don't have class next week. I'm actually out of town next week. It is the end of Passover, and I'm going to be recording our next Shabbat for JLTV in Nashville. So I'm going to be recording it on Tuesday. We're going to be recording a cantor there named Josh Goldberg, and we're going to be recording some Nashville musicians, and I'm hoping it'll come out really good. I don't think it's going to be as country as Joe Buchanan was. That's not Josh's style, but he has some good music, and he's composed some music, and but he's not like I think he's from California. He's not from Nashville. He lives there now. He's the cantor of the large Reformed synagogue in Nashville, but it's not going to be as country as that. So I definitely wanted to get a different part of the country recorded, but it's not going to be. I don't think it's as country as that. Which again, it'll be very good though. So that's where I'll be next Tuesday in the studio in Nashville. But we're going to look at Zechariah, who prophesizes, as we're going to see, at the same time. So we'll read it again. We'll pick it up in 2 weeks, beginning of May. But let's take a look at this guy, who again is mentioned in the book of Ezra. Yes.
One question. Are these are in the order, right? Historical.
Chronological,
right?
yeah.
So if you pull up Zechariah and just the basic,
Yeah.
the one sentence
Description.
It's exact. I didn't see that until now, right? I can't pronounce it. So
Zephaniah, yeah.
Warnings of the destruction God will wreak on the unfaithful, and calls for justice and humility.
Yeah.
Right?
That's every prophet. No, that's every prophet. The difference with Zechariah and Haggai and Malachi, or really Haggai and Zechariah more than Malachi, is that they're talking about, their message is rebuilding the temple. So look, this is exactly the same time, the second year of King Darius, which takes us back to the 500s, beginning of the 5th century BCE. Again, putting into frame of mind that Israel has had its temple destroyed for 70 years. Persian Empire is, at its soon to be at its peak, or close to being at its peak of power. And there's no empire like it. The Greeks are finally starting to come together as city-states, and they're starting to emerge as if not an empire. They're not an empire yet, but they're developing. They're getting their act together. This is the first, and by the way, the Greeks are really the first, if you think about it, they're the first Europeans that make noise, right? Because up until this time, you've had people from Asia, you've had the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, you've had the Egyptians in North Africa, you've had the Hittites in Turkey that are maybe not at the same level as the others, but they've done some stuff. But the Greeks are the first people from Europe that are going to make noise on the world stage. So they're just starting to emerge. But let's read what Zechariah gets told. We'll at least read the first chapter here.
In the 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius, this word of God came to the prophet Zechariah, son of Berechiah, son of Iddo. God was very angry with your ancestors. Say to them further, thus said God of hosts, turn back to me, says God of hosts, and I will turn back to you. said God of hosts. Do not be like your ancestors. For when the earlier prophets called to them, thus said God of hosts, come, turn back from your evil ways and your evil deeds, they did not obey or give heed to me, declares God. Where are your ancestors now? And did the prophets live forever?
So this is a reminder that things didn't work out well for us before. Prophets told you what to do. And that's interesting, by the way, is he's talking about past prophets. He's talking about the people that came before him that were doing what he was doing. People didn't listen to them. Your ancestors heard the message and didn't figure it out. Now, assumedly, again, why is he saying this? Because don't do what they did, right? He's only telling them this because he's not giving them a history lesson. He's telling them don't do the same thing, right? But he reminds them that, and he essentially again says the prophets failed, which is an interesting thing because he's a prophet. He's setting himself up for the same situation. He's like, if you do what your ancestors did, and I do what I did, well, this is just done. We're just replaying the same history.
But the warnings and the decrees with which I charged my servants, the prophets, overtook your ancestors, did they not? And in the end, they had to admit, God of hosts purposed to deal with us according to our ways and our deeds. That is just what has been done to us.
So everything happened just like they said. And now we're dealing with it. And so that's his first message, which is essentially the message of, let's change the dynamic, guys. Let's not keep doing the same thing. Now we get a little weird.
On the 24th day of the 11th month of the second year of Darius, the month of Shevat, this word of God came to the prophet Zechariah, son of Berechiah, son of Iddo. In the night, I had a vision. I saw a figure mounted on a bay horse, standing among the myrtles in the deep, and behind him were bay, sorrel, and white horses.
Whoa, that's already interesting, right? It's a vision. He says that. Yeah. I saw a figure on a bay horse, right?
What's a bay horse?
A bay horse is a horse with a brown coat and a black mane and tail.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Rosemary is the person you need to have in Trivial Pursuit. I knew she knew what a bay horse is because she knows everything.
I thought it was like a horse, San Francisco Bay.
So again, among the myrtles, it's a possibility. The Septuagint reads something different between the mountains. Look, everyone, when they read this, they start thinking about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, there's a reason for that. They're based on this, and there's two versions of this prophecy, but in Zechariah. But that's not what happens in Zechariah. But it's impossible for us to hear it without thinking of the book of Revelations, even though it's not a Jewish book. It was based on these sources. It was based on some of these things, but it's not what's happening here. This is not that. That's a different version of that's a later adaptation of these same kind of visions of horsemen. Yeah, of horsemen. It's a motif, right? We're working off this motif. All right, now keep going. And yeah.
I asked, what are those, my lord? And the angel who talked with me answered, I will let you know what they are. Then the figure who was standing among the myrtles spoke up and said, these were sent out by God to roam the earth.
So here it says flat out, an angel. It says right there. Okay. And there seems to be another angel or divine being with the horses, right?
And in fact, they reported to the angel of God who was standing among the myrtles, we have roamed the earth and have found all the earth dwelling in tranquility. Thereupon the angel of God exclaimed, O God of hosts, how long will you withhold pardon from Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, which you placed under a curse 70 years ago.
Okay, so it's a vision, it's a dream, the horses, the myrtle or the mountains, these images of these angels. But it says right here what the point of this is. How long is this curse going to be on us? It's been on us for 70 years. How long is this curse going to be on us?
God replied with kind, comforting words to the angel who talked with me. Then the angel who talked with me said to me, "Proclaim, thus said God of hosts, I am very jealous for Jerusalem, for Zion. And I am very angry with those nations that are at ease, for I was only angry a little, but they overdid the punishment. Assuredly, thus said God, I graciously return to Jerusalem. My house shall be built in her, declares God of hosts. The measuring line is being applied to Jerusalem."
So God's saying it's over. I was mad at Jerusalem. I was mad at you guys, but these people overdid it. They took advantage of it. And it's time for you guys to be able to come back home. So it's interesting because in this vision, God is talking to the angel. It's the angel that's being told it's time for these guys to come home. Now, it's weird because, you'd be saying like, well, why didn't God just tell him that? Why is he talking to the angel and telling them that? So these visions that Zechariah has, these are being played out. He's recounting them to them like as if he's seen a movie, and he's telling people what I saw in the movie. And the lesson, of course, from this is that God is done punishing us. And to some extent, it went too far. And this is one way of looking at it, which is that God definitely wanted us to be punished, but it went too far. God did not want it to be this man. And God's still talking, by the way. I just kind of interrupted God just now, but the reality is he's saying, again, and this image will be in other places in Zechariah. We read about it already in Ezekiel. God is measuring Jerusalem. God is looking at us and looking at the city and saying, it's time for you to come back to rebuild it, and using these images of what architects used. Yeah.
Proclaim further, thus said God of hosts, my towns shall yet overflow with bounty, for God will again comfort Zion and will again choose Jerusalem.
Yep. And this is this vision that I'm coming home, I'm coming back, and it's going to be good. We're going to read a little bit more. I'm going to read this next vision, which is a very famous one.
I looked up and I saw 4 horns. I asked the angel who talked with me, what are those? Those, he replied, are the horns that tossed Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem.
Now, also imagery that comes up in the book of Revelation, which is, again, horns. Now, here it says they correspond to the 4 winds. Does anybody have something else that it'll start to, well, let's go a little further, comment on it there.
Then God showed me 4 smiths. What are they coming to do? I asked. The angel replied, those are the horns that tossed Judah so that nobody at all could raise their head. And these smiths have come to throw them into a panic, to hew down the horns of the nations that raised a horn against the land of Judah to toss it.
Yeah. So these 4 horns represent the countries that have attacked us. I don't know if anybody has any other notes in their stuff that they want to share, but
why is Smith? I mean, what? Yeah.
No, assumedly, the Smiths are going to come there to hammer them down, right?
Oh, now I get it.
They're going to crush. They're going to crush. No, these are.
The Smith was probably the biggest, most powerful person in the town.
Yeah, and so he has a big hammer, and he's hammering down. He's hammering down.
I get it.
Yeah, he's hammering down the metals, and he's going to knock these horns down. So the horns.
And he's not afraid of big animals. You can't be afraid of big animals. You're going to be a smith.
No, but what's interesting about this is we don't even see the animals that the horns are attached to. We see the horns. So it's a strange, like, how people depict this. Sometimes they actually will depict it on a mount, on a like a rhinoceros or some kind of animal with horns.
No, that's not how the anti-Semites got us wearing.
Horns, no. But the word is used. Carnot is used on the altars, right? Had horns on the ends of them. Moses, it says, has rays of light, Karen or, which are understood as horns of light, but could be rays of light coming off of them. That's where we get the horns on Moses.
Oh.
On Michelangelo's Moses is from the Karen or, from the rays of or the horns of light that he has, and he just put horns on him. But this is the word over and over again, the word Karen. But these represent the people that are that have come against us, and they're about to get smacked down.
I looked up and I saw a figure holding a measuring line. Where are you going? I asked. To measure Jerusalem, he replied, to see how long and wide it is to be. But the angel who talked with me came forward, and another angel came forward to meet him. The former said to him, run to that agent and tell him, Jerusalem shall be peopled as a city without walls, so many shall be the people and cattle it contains. And I myself, declares God, will be a wall of fire around it, and I will be a glory inside it. Away, away, flee from the land of the north, says God, though I swept you there like the four winds of heaven, declares God. Away, escape, O Zion, you who dwell in fair Babylon. For thus said God of hosts, who sent me after glory, concerning the nations that have taken you as spoil, whoever touches you touches the pupil of their own eye.
Right. And so God says to through these messengers, through these prophets, through these angels, it's time for you to come home. And it's time for you to come home from all the places that you've gone to, including Babylon, right? It's time for you to get away from those areas. It's time for you to come home, right? It's time for you to come home. And here it's called Bat Bavel, the daughter or the fair maiden Bavel. Of course, we are Bat Zion. We use that phrase all the time. So he flipped it. He says, escape, O Zion, and those who dwell in fair Babylon. So instead of Bat Zion, it's Bat Bavel. And again, here it comes very clear.
For I will lift my hand against them, and they shall be spoil for those they enslaved. Then you shall know that I was sent by God of hosts. Shout for joy, fair Zion, for lo, I come, and I will dwell in your midst, declares God.
And there's the phrase right there, Bat Zion, which I would have preferred if they had then translated it the same way that they did. They did, fair Babylon. But yeah, just so you know, fair Babylon is Bat Zion, maiden, Bat means daughter, but again, fair is fine. It is they're both, but of course the King James says maiden, daughter, yeah, daughter Zion and daughter Babylon. Okay, let's finish with the last verses.
In that day, many nations will attach themselves to God and become God's people, and God will dwell in your midst. Then you will know that I was sent to you by God of hosts. God will claim Judah as a special portion in the Holy Land and will choose Jerusalem once more. Be silent, all flesh, before God, for God is roused from the holy habitation.
Yep. And so God's going to come back to Jerusalem, going to rebuild Jerusalem. And what does it say? Many nations will attach themselves to God and become God's people.
What a
That
nice
is-
thing to read
Yeah.
right now when I,
Yeah.
feel so Israel's so threatened. It's just a beautiful thing to read.
It is. But just remember something, really, Gail. I wear this label all the time, and most of the time people come up to me and say, thank you for wearing that once I explain that to them. I have yet to have had somebody who's attacked me or said something negative at all to me. Somebody was telling me the other day that they have it was last night, it's my cousin. He has an Israeli flag. He rides a Harley, my cousin. Does not look like your typical Jewish dude, but he has an Israeli flag on his Harley, and he says he's had so many people honking and giving him positive.
Oh, that's wonderful to
So
hear.
you know, it's tough because we read the negative and you read a headline, you know, that all these other colleges are joining Columbia with anti-Israel protests. But if you actually read the article, it's talking about the same places that you would have expected it to be, which is NYU, Yale, and
Yeah.
Harvard. And it was nothing about like what's happening at most college campuses, which is nothing. But you read those articles, you read the headlines, and they get you angry. They get you upset.
What scares me is that at those colleges, the Ivy League colleges, are where a lot of government officials come from.
Yeah.
You know, they
Yep.
connect and they get to know each other and they schmooze. And
Yeah.
I hate to see,
No,
you
it's
know-
terrible. But look, this has been 30 years in the making. This is years and years of
Yeah.
unchecked stuff, and you can hear it. I mean, I saw a video this morning. Somebody attacked Alec Baldwin in a coffee shop and started asking him to scream, you know, to say things against Israel. Did you see that? He wouldn't do it, and then eventually he knocks the phone out of the woman's head. But you can hear what she's saying to him. It is the exact same anti-Semitism. It had nothing to do with Israel. It has become clearly a way for, and again, a lot of these people that are protesting at the college campuses are not college students. They're people that are anti-Semitic folks that are coming out of the woodwork and able to say things against Israel that they want to say about us as Jews.
Signed that lady.
Um,
It was about maybe 7 or 8 Jewish people with the flag, and she had a sign that says Hamas, this is your next target.
Yeah, yeah.
And she wouldn't show her face. She had a
Yeah,
scarf
and
around.
that people are showing signs that saying, yeah, that this is your next target. They're walking past. Yeah, they've done that a few times. They'll have like a sign with an arrow pointed to Hamas, get this person next. So look, I mean, the reality is that it's now becoming very obvious what, you know, what this is, which is it's anti-Semitism. No. And again, a lot of these people are not at the college, but the colleges are cracking down on it. They're now having to deal with it. But you know, the fact that they're complaining about how they have to deal with it now, they haven't dealt with it for 30 years. So now the fact that they're dealing with it, they've let it fester there for 30 years, and now they're dealing with it.
You hear that they want Mitt Romney to be president of Harvard?
No.
Yeah, trying to get him to become the president of Harvard.
Look, there's going to be some things that will come out of this that will eventually fix the problem or at least start addressing it, but it's going to take years. They've let it happen for years, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. And so,
yeah,
what they've
the
done.
other concern I
What?
have is
You
the
think it's
other
going to be fixed? Oh, well, it's got to be fixed, John.
No. History is an indication. Know where you've gone, know where you've been, you know where you're going. The Jew hatred is just, it's coming out. And it's not just Arabs, all right? And
The person that attacked Alec Baldwin was not Arab.
No.
You can hear exactly what the ethnicity of the person was. I understand, but look, we do live in a world where the vast majority, I'm just saying all, but the vast majority of people who live in Kansas or who live in whatever, they are not anti-Semitic, and they were 40 or 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I think white anti-Semitism is at an all-time low, and I think, you know, this other type of anti-Semitism, unfortunately, directed at us from other minorities is at an all-time high.
You know, yesterday,
And that's been brewing for 35, 40 years.
yesterday, before you sent your Passover message,
Yeah.
which happened right when I was reading my Passover message.
Yep.
To my Passover. right?
Yeah.
You know, and I took a little bit from a little bit for everybody, and one of them was the Ashkenazi chief rabbi, and one of his last lines was, "Let there be no jealousy and hatred," and
Yeah.
that's not going to happen.
I know, but we hope it will.
Yeah, well,
It's John, you were the one who was talking about we all need to get back to Woodstock.
I understand. No, back to Woodstock. That was his intent.
Okay, so that's what we got to get back to.
The species not capable of.
Well, I hope you're wrong about that part. I hope we can get back to it.
You know, you hope for the best and you prepare for the worst.
I agree.
And that's what's happening. And that's why.
My concern as a Jewish educator has been that I don't know that we've prepared our kids, our young people, to face anti-Semitism. I think we've taught them how to advocate,
Not anti-Semitic.
but not advocate for ourselves.
I agree with you, Gail.
Advocate.
Gail, I agree with you. We need to prepare people for that for that, and that's a responsibility of ours. I
I
agree.
wasn't prepared. Who in
Yeah.
my generation? I've never seen this before. I know history, but I've never seen this before. Do you know,
Yeah.
and then looking back, I just think that maybe I didn't give them enough tools to go to campus and be able to speak back or to
I
have
agree.
some.
Listen, I agree with you, Gail, but the good thing is that it's becoming crystallized. The next step will be how do we deal with it and whether we can survive it? But I hope we can. I believe we can, but we have a lot of work to do.
You know
Yeah.
what the big things will be? When
What?
the more people like Kraft and Ackman and Cooperman, when they start pulling their, which they're doing, which they've done, pulling their funding.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's going to have to be an economic consequence for it. Yes. All right, folks. Have a great Chag, a great Passover. And we hope to see you again. If you won't
I
be
have
here
one
next week,
question.
we'll be here in 2 weeks. Yeah.
One question. How do I get JTL TV?
Well, depends on what you have. JLTV, if you have a computer, just go to jltv.tv and you can watch it on your
Okay.
computer.
Okay. Thank you.
It's streaming live. All right,
Okay.
everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye,
Take care.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. All right.
Bye.
Happy Passover, everybody.
Happy Passover.
Bye-bye.